The seasoned politician and minister in charge of urban affairs and housing, Venkaiah Naidu, resigned from his dual ministerial post and filed his nominations as NDA's candidate for vice president. And the capital is abuzz at his departure from a ministry which was in charge of implementing some of Prime Minister's flagship missions such as Housing for All, Smart City, Amrit Swachh Bharat. Not just these critical ones, home buyers are also concerned that sputtering implementation of RERA Act in several states might also not get the whiplash it used to regularly get from the outgoing minister. Joining us to find out the impact of Mr. Naidu's exit from urban affairs and housing are Dr. M. Ramachandran, former Secretary, Urban Development Ministry, Ghulam Zia, Executive Director, Knight Frank India, Ramesh Menon, Director, Certis Reality, and Abhay Upadhyay, National Convener, Fight for RERA. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me. Of course, Dr. Ramachandran, the first question is to you. Mr. Naidu, very seasoned, very senior, and seemed like he was very much in charge of all these missions, at least towards the end of the third year. My last interview with him, he seemed like he was in control, he knew what was happening, and all the missions were actually gaining traction, which they didn't really see in the first 1.5 years.
I would agree with you 100%, there is no doubt. And I don't think, see, first of all, he's a leader of stature. And it's it's not quite often that urban development gets a minister of that level, one among the senior most ministers, to be in charge of now the combined urban development or urban affairs ministry.
Right, right.
And then right at the beginning, I mean, led by the Prime Minister, he had the capacity to put these programs in position. I mean, unlike some other governments where these programs come out in the second or third year, he had the political sagacity and maturity to bring all these onto the table right at the beginning of the regime.
And most of them needed state involvements. And
Absolutely.
that, I think, was the big plus point of Mr. Naidu. Like you said, his experience of being able to bring in states for Amrit, for Housing for All, and for all the other missions, isn't it?
Also,
that traction.
Yeah, that's right, that's right. And see, urban basically depends on what is the support or funding available from the Government of India. States are moved only when there is a certain support from the Government of India. That makes a big difference. So it's a difficult tightrope walking also for the central ministry, because there is something from the center, but then the states have to fall in line and they have to find the resources, and also they have to take the program forward. So that required a different type of leadership. It's not just one of those straitjacket ministries where the center has to do what it's supposed to do. Now, the states don't have to do much. So that made a big difference. And I think all these programs which you referred to, and two of them are very major programs, both Housing for All and Swachh Bharat, it required a leadership of his level and his stature to put it on stream. And I think in these 3 years, probably it has gained certain momentum. It's a question of taking it forward.
And what happens? You've been part of the ministry at the top. Tell me, what happens with the change of minister? How much are these programs which are under implementation actually get derailed or lose momentum, rather?
I do not expect it to get derailed, because I suppose there will be another competent minister coming, whether of his stature or not. That's a different issue.
Mr. Tomar has been announced as the next minister.
No, he has been given additional charge.
Additional charge.
Whether he's going to be the regular minister or not,
we don't know.
We will know when the vice president's election is over and the proper reshuffle takes place. Of course, defense also needs a minister. So whoever comes there, I think he will make a genuine and sincere effort to understand these programs. But understanding and then bringing the states on board, that probably could take some time. But to be fair, I would say, since the Prime Minister keeps on monitoring all these programs, probably his monitoring may be much, much more effective in the initial stages till the new minister settles down. And with the type of leadership given by Mr. Naidu, I think there is a certain momentum created. So it's a question of the states continuing with that activity. And at least for the time being, the ministry has a secretary who has worked in the ministry and who is continuing as a secretary.
Okay, let me come to the question of secretaries a little bit later, because there's been a big change there as well. All right, Ramesh Menon, your reaction to Mr. Naidu going out. You work closely with the ministry on ground. Tell me, the fact that Urban Development Ministry actually never had such a senior leadership, and that itself, and such critical missions, and now they've lost that minister, is that going to be a big impact? I mean, Mr. Ramachandran saying, don't worry, new minister will come in and maybe the momentum won't be lost. What's your own gut feel and your understanding?
No, I would tend to agree with Mr. Ramachandran that there will be a hiatus about 3 to 6 months before the ministry gathers pace again. Having said that, the policy making of the various initiatives or the SOPs took about 3 years. Now it was time for actioning them or actually implementing them on the ground in conjunction or in partnership with the states. So there would be a temporary lull, and to my mind, the Prime Minister, after the reshuffle, should send somebody to this ministry who, if you look at it, people talk about home, defense, finance, but urban development, when we are talking about a migration of almost 500 million people from rural to urban over the next 3 decades, all the initiatives that need to be rolled out today is what will impact the country in the next 30 years. So, yes, I tend to agree that we need somebody very senior, somebody charismatic who can actually woo the states to implement or partner the center in rolling out these initiatives. And these are pretty large and financially
huge commitments, huge commitments made.
Of money.
Absolutely, whether it's Housing for All or Smart City Mission. All right, let me get
from the government, private sector as well as FDI. Let's not ignore the FDI component, where we are talking about almost $60 billion coming in only on these initiatives.
Absolutely, both Smart City and Housing for All. There's a lot of foreign direct investment also which had started coming in. There was a big investment from Qatar government in one of the funds which was looking at Housing for All. All right, Ghulam Zia, your reaction. What are your big concerns with the change of guard?
Well, I will only say so much that last couple of years, I would say a year and a half or so, we have seen a pace which was unforeseen historically. We have been a part of this industry for a long time, almost about a quarter of a century. The kind of impetus, the kind of focus on timeline, the kind of focus on delivery and execution, which we have seen in last year and a half. In all quarters, I'm saying all stakeholders, even the consultants like us, have been working on very, very tight leash, delivering in time, and that was unheard of. So that is something which I'm going to miss in times to come. Perhaps we will get somebody more focused and better placed to implement these strategies and initiatives. But then big concern is about, those big initiatives like Smart Cities, Amrut, PME, RERA, all of them. All these actually have, and then if I can bring your attention to one thing which we all have been historically talking about, is that housing is a state subject. And central ministry is running with their hands tied behind their back. But that is something, that myth was busted last year and a half, because, maintaining that balance between the state and center, absolutely critical, was done so beautifully in last couple of months, which is unheard of. So nobody in last year and a half has ever said that housing is a state subject.
Absolutely.
The center can't do much. For the first time, we actually broke that myth, and that is something which my worry is, I don't know if it will continue at that pace, or will there be a let-up? I'm not too sure.
In fact, you really summed it up so beautifully. For the first time, housing actually, as a subject matter, acquired a national importance, and everyone started looking at that Housing for All mission, Smart City. The urban reform agenda became a national level agenda. All right, I'm going to come to you, Abhay Aima. I mean, I know that your association has fought almost a decade war for RERA. Finally, you had a minister who actually pushed through a Central RERA Act, which was almost perfect in its composition. Then you saw some dilutions, and now you have a minister who was, if nothing else, constantly pulling up the states for not implementing RERA. And now there's an exit. How much is that going to impact the implementation?
Well, Manisha, as you rightly said, when I heard the news yesterday, it was a kind of a mixed feeling for me. On the one hand, as a home buyer, we were very happy on his nomination as the NDA candidate for vice president. But at the same time, I'm sure the home buyers will miss him at the helm of affairs of housing ministry, since he was very proactively involved in the enactment of RERA. We all know that RERA was his baby. RERA was pending for since 2008. And it was only his personal commitment and interest in the subject that he used to have so many meetings, and he used to guide us, help us how to get a position on board, and finally the bill was passed. It was only due to his support and leadership that both the houses of the parliament passed this bill, and we all home buyers are pinning our hopes on this enactment to get justice. And obviously...
Abhay Upadhyay, just can you run me through what are your concerns now? Because you already have several states which haven't even come out with the final rules. Here you had a minister who was constantly pulling them up. There was some fear that, yes, there's a central minister who's keeping a very, very close eye. Now you have a minister who's perhaps interim in charge of this entire portfolio. So what happens from here? What's the downside?
Well, Minister, the main difference which will come is that new minister will be taking as one of the many subjects assigned to him. Whereas, for Venkaiah Ji, RERA was his own baby, and he understood that there was a dilution going on, and the interests of the home buyers are being now compromised by state through rules. And as you rightly said, he has been for last 6 months. He has been traveling across the country and sending letters to the chief ministers. Now the point is how much interest you take in the subject, and when the subject is very close to your heart, obviously you give all out effort to ensure that there is no compromise in the interest of the home buyer. Now my only worry is if the subject matter of dilution and implementation of RERA is not taken up in the same way as our respected Venkaiah Ji was taking up, we may not get justice ever. So the point is there is a discontinuity now, and though we are hopeful that we will get this is an interim arrangement, and whoever minister comes in finally will also try to take up from the place where Venkaiah Ji has left, and ensure that the RERA is implemented in letter and spirit.
All right, genuine concerns there, isn't it, that Mr. Upadhyay has, Mr. Ramachandran. Here was a central minister who really made RERA one of his personal missions to make sure, and at every speech, every press conference, he mentioned that. He said, home buyers' confidence has to be restored. And now you have a big gap. So new minister or the interim minister will take 3 to 6 months to bring all or understand all of these missions. Do you think that that's the only issue here, or the fact that the merging of the ministries itself has made the portfolio probably a little bit unwieldy? Do you believe that?
I won't call it unwieldy, but it's a sensible decision, because there was no point in having a separate ministry for housing and urban poverty alleviation, because there are very many issues where the two ministries have to work together. So it's a good thing that the two departments or ministries have been merged, and it's one. Of course, it becomes a huge ministry now, and it makes a big difference. So I'm sure whoever comes as the regular minister will have full charge of this ministry. For Mr. Naidu, handling one more portfolio was not difficult, because he had that type of weight and capacity and I would say sagacity to lead more than one ministry after putting in position very many of the basics. So for the new minister, it's really going to be a challenge. I mean, coming to think of it, I can't think of very many such political personalities. I may be venturing into a difficult area where there are urban specialists or those who have worked in the urban sector who would be given charge of this ministry. So it's also a question of appreciation of urban issues. Mr. Naidu himself used to say, I also have migrated from rural to urban.
Absolutely.
So, but his background made a big difference. And the way he appreciated problems and carried people along, like one of the panelists mentioned, it made a big difference. I mean, his style was to carry everyone with him, whether it is ruling party state or an opposition ruled state. He had that knack of carrying people along, ministers and
also respect, whether it was opposition.
Absolutely, yeah.
Also, there was a certain respect which came because of his experience as a seasoned politician.
Non-controversial. There was no baggage as far as he was concerned. So people respected him. And the political weight, I would once again repeat that, one among the top 4 ministers of the country. He was handling urban development. That made a big difference, especially in the sector where you have to be continuously in dialogue with the states, whether it is RERA, whether it is any of those programs. Most of the
political weight that Mr. Naidu carried. We're going to take a quick short break, but Mr. Venkaiah Naidu has exited from the Urban Affairs and Housing Ministry. What impact will it have on those 5 big missions or 4 big missions and RERA, which are, of course, very critical for urban reforms? We'll come back. We're discussing that. We'll keep the conversation going. Stay with us.